Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin. All right, welcome back to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. I'm here, as always, with Pat and Lewis. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, Jake. Good to see you.
Doing good. Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. So we're continuing our discussion. We're now moving on to verse 3. So, Pat, why don't you let us know what that is?
Let us break their bonds asunder, and let us cast away their yoke from us.
All right. So, Pat, you were saying that bonds is an interesting word.
Yeah, I think bonds is a great translation for this verse because this is spoken by the kings and the princes trying to cast off what they see as their restrictions imposed on them by God, that this is what they're throwing off. And I really like the term bond here because bond does have the sense of chains, of something that restricts you, that subjects you, that's a symbol of servitude. All of that is true, but we also use the word bond to mean what connects us with people. That you and I have a special bond, for example, right? That's a good thing, and so it has this kind of ambiguity behind it, which is useful to think about in this verse because, yes, the Lord has imposed a bond upon us. He's imposed a yoke upon us, and the question is, how do we view that bond? Do we view it in the negative connotation or in the positive connotation? And it seems that the princes of the earth and the kings, their mistake is to view it negatively. And our goal is to try to view those restrictions on our freedom, or what we may perceive as restrictions on our freedom, as something positive, as a bond, a connection with God.
So the Latin there, is that vincula?
Yeah, that means chains. Bonds, I guess, is fine.
When I see that, it reminds me of, like, I don't know if I'm getting this correctly, but like to conquer almost. Is it the same?
Yeah,
root?
it's a different
Okay,
word,
different
vinkio, to bind.
Okay.
But the word appears in lots of different places. For example, you may have prayed. There's this prayer after you say your sins, version of the Confiteor, where you say "A vinculis peccatorum nostrorum absolvat nos omnipotens et misericordias Dominus." From the chains of our sins, absolve us, Almighty and merciful God. So there, it's chains, kind of bonds, in the negative sense, the kind of the inhibit, these things that inhibit our freedom, that restrict us, that prevent us from doing what we really want to do. So I like thinking about that word vincula, bond, in that context as well. There's God's bonds, and then there's the bonds of sin, and how do we view each of them in the proper way?
Yeah, I also think too, like if there's certain translations of this, right? So I think another translation we could see is fetters. Fetters could be one, including at the end of this podcast. Yeah. Fetters, but it means the same thing, right? Yeah, so I love the word bonds though instead, because it has both the positive and the negative connotation to it. And it makes me think about the story of Samson, who it's just so interesting because I think that idea of bonds and chains are just really at play in that. And Samson's unique because he's, at his birth, is really entering into a special vocational bond with God that has preconditions, right? So he has to do certain things. He can't cut his hair. He can't have certain foods. He's kind of consecrated from his birth in a way, and has all of these like special obligations, you could say, as a part of his special vocation and call. But the entire story of Samson is about how he does everything in his power to avoid to be submissive. Right. It's almost like he looks at the gift he's received of this special bond with God as a fetters, as chains, as a burden.
Yeah.
And so the entire time you read the story and you're like, why are you fighting against this gift you received so hard? Like, why are you doing everything, going out of your way to like make things disastrously bad? And I just think about us because as I think, many of us are baptized from our childhood. We have, and we have this, special vocation through baptism to holiness.
Mhm.
And we can look at, just like what you're saying, how we look at these bonds that God's given. We can look at these as restrictions on our freedom. We can't do certain things. It's a bunch of do's and don'ts, or whatever, however we kind of frame it. And I just think about Samson, where it's like we can look at Samson and see, like, don't you realize the gift you've been given in this special vocation, that you actually, or the result of prayers, that your mom sacrificed and all these things happened for you. You're a miraculous person. You're miraculous. And yet, how often do we look at our own circumstances and we're like, we don't recognize the gift we received in our vocation.
Right, right.
Um, and we look at that as a burden, just like Samson. But another part of that too is the beauty of the story, because the whole time God is continuously faithful.
Mm.
Every time, like, Samson is putting himself in a position where he's fighting against God's gift to himself, God continues to reach out to him and is never turning away. And is never like, all right, Samson, you're done. Your vocation revoked. Like, you're no longer consecrated to me. No, even to the very end,
Mhm.
he's with Samson, and the Spirit of God continuously comes upon him to save him from circumstances. And I think about how often we look at our bond with God, if you will, as it can be a barrier for us, or it can, but really it's a gift.
Mhm.
And that story just kind of illuminated that for me.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to think in this context about the way we use bond in discussing also our relationships with other people. That we have a bond. I think that's a phrase I used before. But you think, if you're married, you have this kind of bond. This and that there it has both senses. Both
Yeah,
it
right.
has, it's a commitment. It's something that you cannot break. But it's also a connection, right?
Mm,
Um, and that's what commitment is. It's this bond that says, I will do this because that's what I really want to do. And it holds you to that commitment, um, for all time, or, until death do you part. And so I think that that's, a beautiful way to think about that. In Colossians, chapter 3, verse 14, um, Paul instructs the Colossians to, upon everything else, put love, which is the bond of perfection.
mm,
In Greek, syndesmos, and Latin, vincula, as we talked about. So that word bond there, what is the bond of perfection? It's love. That the love is kind of what bond really, is the completion of the term bond, of
mm,
commitment, of connection, um, that cannot be broken. That's what this is really about. And the
Mhm.
princes and the kings of the earth don't understand that. They don't understand that the Lord's law, the Lord's rule, that these are love. These are the
mm,
bonds of perfection, not of power, and subjugation, in a kind of destroying your freedom sort of way, but, in a much higher, more perfect way.
That's interesting, and especially because 'cause you're drawing out the bonds and as the relationships that we have with others, um, which, basically should be these manifestations of these ideals that you're speaking about, like, true love and faith. Um, Aquinas, when he was commenting on this particular psalm, he says, uh, and this kind of gets to the second part of the verse a little bit, but it says, a yoke cannot be removed unless the bonds are loosened. In a kingdom, bonds are those things by which the royal power is made firm, such as soldiers, forts, and arms. Therefore, it is appropriate first to destroy these things and then to remove the yoke. And you're making me think, Pat. It actually like really drives me nuts when I hear people say this. They refer to like their wife as the
ball and
old
chain.
ball and
I do.
chain. Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's just kind of like drives like a dagger in the heart.
Yeah.
Like don't say that. Like, but uh, what happens is like when we attack those bonds, those relationships, and like start to like see these other people in our life as burdens to us, or like as in some way you know, as obstacles to our happiness and kind of fulfillment and flourishing in life. And so unfortunately, like, we start to like attack those bonds, and then sadly sometimes people just then totally throw off that yoke.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can take that as a reminder in a positive sense of hey, if we start to see ourselves weakening those bonds in any small ways, that should be like a total like red flag. Like, okay, this is not the road I want to go down. Um, these people are in my life. I have this relationship. God put them by my side for better, for worse, right? And how do I strengthen this bond rather than rebelling against it in some way?
Yeah, I think about I was in a spiritual conversation and was going through some struggles and um I remember that I received the advice that the vocation is never the problem, it's always the solution.
Mm,
And that within the vocation, so even if you think about the vocation of our baptism, we've received in baptism everything we need to be a saint,
mm,
right? So that we've been given everything. In our marriage, we've received everything we need to have holiness in marriage and to grow in holiness in marriage. But how we approach that, right? We can see like there's an issue here, and so we can be hyper attuned to issues, and I think that's what we see, or the obligations, right? As a chain, as a weight. Like for example, in our baptism, I have to go to mass every Sunday. What a horror! And we may even know in our lives folks who this is a real struggle. They're like,
mhm,
that's
mhm,
crazy,
mhm.
and we would kind of advocate maybe that's less than even you should really be doing. But but for some people that seems like a chain. Like, why
Yeah.
are you so legalistic? Why are you trying? But, it's all because it's actually and it kind of connects too to back to the Samson story real quick, because as he's fighting these bonds of God, then at the very end of the story, he's put in the bonds of the Philistines. And then they actually
Mm,
put him in real chains, which is
mhm,
exactly what happens with sin, right? We're fighting actually these kind of bonds, which are actually enabling our true liberty. And
mhm.
then we're given into the bonds of license, the real bonds like that
Yeah.
we feel like we can't really get out of. And that's when he's chained and blinded and everything else
Mhm,
that are
mhm.
really the pains. And that's the same thing, right, in marriage. If we don't follow, if we don't want to put ourselves under the obligation, if you will, in quotes, of our marriage vows, then we're going to become under the fetters of the evils that come from not doing that,
Yeah.
right? Much worse. Same thing with our baptism. If we aren't willing to follow through with the obligations in our call to holiness, then we will experience the chains of sin and the weight of that, which will be much more painful and difficult than any arduous task we may associate with our call to holiness. And so, yeah, just to echo your point, that ball and chain.
Well,
um,
we're gonna continue this discussion next week, getting into some of the other elements of the bonds and the perception of them. So all this and more next time.
why this tumult among nations, among peoples, this useless murmuring? They arise, the kings of the earth. Princes plot against the Lord and his anointed. Come, let us break their fetters. Come, let us cast off their yoke. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord is laughing them to scorn. Then he will speak in his anger. His rage will strike them with terror. It is I who have set up my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will announce the decree of the Lord. The Lord said to me, "You are my son. It is I who have begotten you this day. Ask, and I shall bequeath to you the nations. Put the ends of the earth in your possession. With a rod of iron you will break them, shatter them like a potter's jar. Now, O kings, understand. Take warning, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with awe and trembling. Pay him your homage, lest he be angry and you perish, for suddenly his anger will blaze. Blessed are they who put their trust in God."
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share with a friend or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.